And good afternoon,
Recording in progress.
everyone. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And back with us is Daniel Rogers, who was puny last week. And by the way, Daniel, I don't know if you're even aware of it or not, but I recorded last week's program. It was awesome, but Zoom lost it.
Oh no.
I walked out of the office, with it processing and everything
Yeah.
like that. I was going to publish it the very next morning. Um, and there was a dialogue box on my screen that said, this video, I don't know, did not process, is not available, blah, blah, blah. It was nowhere to be found. I went into the area where it keeps your recordings, not there.
Oh
Couldn't
wow.
find it anywhere. And that's why I said it was totally awesome.
Yeah, I noticed that you have this one set to record too.
I have it recording just in case.
There you
But
go.
anyway, it's good to know you're feeling better. Your
Yep.
voice is sounding a whole lot better from what it was when you
Yeah.
called me.
Yeah, had y'all heard me last week, it would have been it would have been disastrous. But I started feeling bad Monday night. My nose just started pouring. I mean, it was just pouring and pouring and pouring. And I had a cough developing and everything, which is not all that abnormal with the acid reflux and whatnot. But then
Yeah.
Tuesday I got up and I just felt like I'd been run over by a truck. Not that I've ever been run over by a truck before, but I would assume that's what it felt like. And I thought I'm gonna. I got to the office. I dropped the kids off at daycare. I sat there for a second. I just said no. I gotta go home. So I told Leanne that I had to go and went to the house, laid down, just did nothing all day, and in hopes that I would be better by that evening. But it just was no use. Couldn't go do my music. Couldn't go do my recording with you. So I ended up being still puny the next day, well, sort of. And I ended up going to Bible class that night, though. And then I was feeling better Thursday through Sunday, but my voice was still super hoarse. And I can already feel it getting a little strained even now,
Mm.
talking like I have. So it's
Yeah.
still not 100%, but we'll get there. So
Well, glad to know you're able to talk. Folks, you should have heard him last week when he was when he was croaking, trying to talk
yeah.
to me and tell me he couldn't be on the show.
I can't be all two guys in the Bible.
That's right. That's
But
about what it was.
And then the week
Uh,
before that, I got to go to North Carolina. There's a retreat center over there in the mountains, beautiful.
oh,
And
North Carolina's a beautiful place.
it is. And they decided that retreat center puts on a yearly retreat for ministers, church workers, pastors, whoever, to come the week after Easter and just relax and not have to worry about it. So they
That's
they
cool.
they give a few little devotionals throughout the week, but really the big attraction is that they offer 4 tracks. Hiking, you can do hiking, you can go fly fishing, you can do painting, or you can do like yoga or something. I don't know about that one. Not interested in that. My body I can barely even touch my toes. So I did hiking. I would have liked to have done fly fishing, but you have to. What's one thing is you have to buy all your own gear and bring it.
Oh,
Yeah, so I don't have any fly fishing gear,
yeah.
But you go there and then you spend. There's about 20 people in your group. They kind of keep it small, and you spend the whole 3 or 4 days hiking and getting to know people from all over the country. And so
Cool.
I got to spend a lot of time that week talking about covenant eschatology, and they were super interested in 1 Corinthians 15 and the corporate body and all that sort of thing. So
Sure.
it was a really good week overall.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned fly fishing. When I was a young man in high school, uh, I had probably 4 fly rods. That was really
Oh,
one of my very favorite forms of fishing
yeah.
back then. And there in Northwest Arkansas, there are just all sorts of rivers. And, it's open to the public. You don't have to have permission hardly from anybody. And I used to absolutely love to go on the rivers.
Mm.
And my dad and my brother-in-law and I, we would go wading and just we'd pick a spot, we'd park, and we would just walk down a stream
Yeah.
for literally miles and just fish as we went. And some of the most enjoyable times of my life were doing that. And fly fishing is an art. when you got an 8 foot pole
Yeah.
and you're trying to whip that little fly back, or I use popping bugs. I absolutely love top water. And you're trying to manipulate that back up and under some limbs and all this kind of stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty challenging, but it's sure a lot of fun.
Have you ever seen the movie or read the book A River Runs Through It?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I love the opening where the dad, he's a Presbyterian minister, and
yeah.
it said something like that dad believed, just like grace, that fly fishing came with a whole lot of work and effort.
Yeah, yeah,
I just chuckled when I saw that when I saw that line for the first time. That was good. But
yeah, yeah, it
uh,
really was.
yeah,
Well, pardon me. Want to kind of get back into our subject of the messianic temple. I have been working and working and working, trying to get my lighting correct. And I've got this beautiful light right here on the top of my head. I've even taken two of the bulbs out of my overhead bar,
yeah,
hoping that that would kind of reduce that. And as long as I keep down like this, it's okay, except it looks like my hair is glowing. And then when I put my glasses on, as you can tell, like that,
yeah,
I've got this marvelous reflection. Uh, but then again, if I take them off, I can't read. So it's kind of a trade off. But that, like I said, I've been wondering how I could put up some lights, get me some frontal lights
yeah,
here.
yeah.
And
I've got two. Uh,
yeah,
I mean,
you've got fantastic lights there.
the two they come in this. It's kind of like what you if you go to get your picture made, like in school or
Yeah,
whatever. They've got
yeah,
the film over the light, and it's just
yes.
two lights that sit one on this side of the desk, one behind the desk on that side, and they're they're kind of ugly, but they're out of the way, and I just flip them on before I do my recording. It works out
Well,
great.
like I said, you've got really, really good lighting there. And as
Yeah.
you can tell, I pulled the shades back there.
Oh yeah.
I've got shades on the far end of this room. I've got the lights off in that area right there.
Yeah.
And trying to cut down on the backlight that was so very, very bright at this time of the afternoon. And like I said, this is as good as I've been able to get it. The four lights bulbs that are immediately above me, they're track lights. I'm going to be able to move one of them that way, probably 6 or 8 inches. I don't know if that's going to help any with this or not, but
Yeah.
uh, just struggle with it the best I can. There's really no room in this area right here in front of me to put any lights. I would literally have to have them installed up here
Oh
um,
okay.
in order to have some front light and try to hopefully deflect off of this.
Yeah,
So
mine are more on the side of the desk anyways than behind it because you're right up against the wall to me.
yes,
So
yes,
these are just right on the edges, the back corner of each desk. So
yeah.
that's what I do. I used to have it all had it real fancy. I had it all hooked up to some these Wi-Fi outlets, and so I would come in to do my recording, and I would tell the I'm not going to say it out loud because it'll trigger the ones in the people's rooms that are watching. But I would tell that lady to start streaming, and she would cut
Hey
on.
Siri.
Actually, mine was the Amazon one, the Alexa one. So
Yeah.
uh, I would have I go in and say, "Hey Alexa, start streaming" or whatever, and she would turn on all my lights, and
Oh wow.
it was super fancy. I felt proud. And then when I disassembled all that to move the first time, I didn't get it all set back up again. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it,
Well, you know all about that technology. I don't.
yeah,
And so I'm struggling to do the very best that I can. So I'm going to work on some things. I know that they've got these little small pole lights that you can get that don't have 1,200 watts and 5,000 lumens. So I've got to try to do something to get that glare off of the top of my head. So anyway, we last week, even though it did not get recorded, Daniel, I continued a discussion uh, from Isaiah chapter 66, and really what I focused on to a great extent is what God wanted and wants instead of this physical instead of a physical building. And we've touched on this several different times in our discussions. But in what we might call academic discussions of, well, is there going to be a rebuilt temple? Is there going to be a restored Jerusalem, et cetera, et cetera? Those are deeply theological issues. But we can sometimes lose sight of what the whole point of a temple was. And that's God dwelling with people. And Yahweh was always very emphatic. A physical building was never going to be able to contain him. Solomon was very graphic about that. What people is there? What nation is there that is great enough to serve you? What building is there that could hold you? They're in 1 Kings chapter 8. So there has always been, theologically, the doctrine that says physical temples are never, ever the focus of God's desire. So what we have to focus on is being the kind of temple, being the kind of dwelling place that God wants us to be. And so I focused on that to a good extent last week. And I focused also on the terminology that is found in Isaiah chapter 66. Since it did not get recorded, well, it got recorded and lost. We can go back over this a little bit more. And this kind of gets back to the theology aspect of it. But nonetheless, Isaiah 66, 7 and following. Before she, that's Israel, before she was in labor, she gave birth. Before her pain came, she delivered a male child. Who has heard of such a thing? Who has heard such a thing? Shall the earth be made to give birth in one day? Shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she gave birth to her children. Shall I bring to the time of birth and not cause delivery, says the Lord? Shall I, who cause delivery, shut up the womb, says your God? It seems to me, Daniel, and I know one thing, I'm definitely going to have to put another bulb in there because my page is dark to try to read it. It's like, whoa, hello there. Yeah. Either that or get some more powerful glasses. I've got an eye doctor appointment next week, I think it is. These verses have been the cause of a tremendous amount of discussion. Of course, you could almost say that about almost any verse in the Bible, to be honest about it. But I think that these verses present a reality that is extremely daunting to the doctrine of a literal, physical, future temple of God. I know they don't mention temple. I know that they do not mention even Zion, except ever briefly. Before Zion was in labor, she brought forth, etc. What are your initial thoughts on the message of these verses in your research? Don't try to think about what I'm wondering
That
or
is what I
wanting.
was. That is what I was
I know
wondering.
that. I figured that's what you were. Yeah. What? Okay. What's he driving at here?
Yeah, yeah. I think that one thing that you see in Isaiah 66, 7 through 9 is the mystery of it all. I mean, before she travailed, she brought forth, before her pain came, she gave birth to a male child. It's it's against what they would expect. It's going to circumvent all their expectations. So whatever this is that he's talking about, whatever their initial interpretation of it might be, or initial thinking might be, your inclination might be, they should pause and go, wait a minute, it's something beneath that. There's a deeper meaning here than just the surface level literal meaning of the text, right? So
Yeah.
that's my first impression from it, is that this new heavens and new earth, this messianic temple, is going to subvert their expectations. So, and
Okay.
and the other thing about that is that you see in verse 8, can a land be born in one day? Can a nation be brought forth all at once? The answer that he gives is, as soon as Zion travailed, she also brought forth her sons. So this is more about a creation of a new people than it is the creation of a physical structure or the creation of a literal heavens and earth. It's about the creation of a people, kind of like was discussed in Isaiah 65. So that's
Oh,
my
I think that is spot on. That particular aspect, I think that is absolutely spot on. And let's not forget that the creation of the new people is inextricably bound up with the concept of the messianic temple
right.
in the kingdom. And so we once again we see all this interwovenness of these biblical doctrines. And years ago, and I wrote an article on this. It's posted on my website. Actually, I think it's about a 2 or 3 point or part article uh, on my website, donkpreston.com. You know, Daniel, one of the most foundational, fundamental doctrines of dispensationalism is that Jesus came to establish the messianic kingdom, which of course means that he was going to build the messianic temple. Somehow, some way that's interwoven, you know, with the concept of the kingdom. You can't have kingdom without the temple in the biblical reality of things. So Jesus came to establish the kingdom. He offered the kingdom to Israel. They rejected it. Thomas Ice, in the book End Times Controversy, said that Jesus Christ made a legitimate offer of the kingdom to Israel. However, their rejection and their unbelief of that offer and the rejection of that offer made it, quote, impossible, end quote, that's Thomas Ice's word, for Jesus to fulfill his mission and to establish the kingdom. Now, what that means is the time had actually arrived for the kingdom, and they even admit this. Dispensationalists from Ryrie to Schofield to Ice, you name it, they admit it. The time was actually right for Christ to come to offer the kingdom, which raises all sorts of theological problems. Pardon me. If the time was right, and if Jesus came at just the right time, why wasn't he able to do what the Father said he was going to do at just the right time?
Yeah.
Okay. So this idea that Jesus came at just the right time to offer the kingdom, which meant interrelated to that is to build a messianic temple. But the Jews rejected that offer, and consequently, God had to postpone the kingdom. He withdrew the kingdom offer from Israel, postponed it so far by 2,000 years, and in the meantime, he's established the church. The church is the interim part or interim plan B. It was never predicted, never prophesied, totally unknown in the Old Testament. That too is an absolutely fundamental aspect of dispensationalism. But one of these days, supposedly very soon. By the way, did you get the email about 2.5 weeks ago that said the rapture will be in 5.5 hours?
No, I didn't get that.
Yeah. And
I missed it.
yeah, well, I guess I did too. I waited for 6.5 hours just to make sure that the
Yeah,
timeline
thumbs
was,
on. Yeah.
you know, what had come and gone. And the person who had sent it to me just simply forwarded the message to me from somebody else.
Oh, okay.
And I wrote to them and responded to their email. And I said, "Oh, drat. I guess we missed this flight. Maybe we can catch the next flight."
Yeah,
I just got a bang out of it.
that's great. Yeah.
Although it's horribly sad that people, I cannot imagine someone sending out an email in all seriousness. The rapture is going to be in 5.5 hours.
What was even going on 2 weeks ago that would warrant that?
You know,
Was it
at the
Easter
time,
or
yeah, Easter was 2 weeks ago.
yeah?
2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So that might have been the reason for it. The email itself did not delineate, didn't discuss, and didn't tell us why. It just said the time has come. The rapture is going to be in 5.5 hours.
Oh.
Uh, By the way, that website has disappeared. It got raptured.
Well, that's probably what they meant.
Could be. We're
The ser-
shutting it down. It got raptured.
the servers got raptured. They just wanted as many
Yes,
clicks as they
indeed.
could before it. Uh,
So here's the point. That postponement doctrine, Jesus came at just the right time, rejection of the offer, offer withdrawn, kingdom postponed, waiting for the rapture. God's going to take the church out of the world, restore Israel as his covenant people, on and on. Jesus will come after a 7-year tribulation period, actually 3.5, but nonetheless, save Israel from the great tribulation, build the messianic temple. Now that's in a nutshell is the dispensational paradigm. Now, like I said, Isaiah 66, 7 and following hit me like a thunderbolt years and years ago. And it's because of this specific verse. Shall I bring to the time of the birth and not bring forth, says the Lord. Shall I, who caused delivery, shut up the womb? Now, what's that saying? God is saying, when the time comes for the kingdom, will I postpone it?
yeah.
Will I put it off? Shall I bring to the time of birth and not bring forth? Well, that's obviously a rhetorical question that demands a no answer, a definitive no. So here is Yahweh. I have often said and often thought down through the years that God has a sense of humor, and that God in his omnipotence, and to me, this is part of the indescribable beauty of the Bible. It seems like no matter what doctrine someone comes up with, you've got some biblical texts that were written thousands of years ago in some cases, that addresses that very principle and utterly blows it out of the way, out of the water. It's absolutely amazing.
Mm.
You know, we're seeing, by the way, this trans movement, transgender movement. Well, guess what? In Leviticus and Exodus, God forbade men to dress as women and for women to dress as men and to act the part. Huh. So that's been going an awful long time. And God said, I won't have anything to do with it. Men are men, women are women. End of story. So I have said and believe God has a sense of humor, but most of all, he's omniscient. He knows what is going to be. He has included in his word concepts, precepts, commands, mandates, principles that cover virtually anything that man can think of. God said, I've already addressed that. Comment?
I just was thinking about the people who say that the mark of the beast is microchips.
Yeah, I know.
um, no, on your point though about from Isaiah 66, when God brings to the point of birth, He will deliver. She will deliver. I was thinking about Daniel 11 and how
Mm-hmm.
I've got a couple passages pulled up here about how there were 3 different times in the course of Daniel 11 in this story of the king of the north and the king of the south. He says in verse 14 about how the violent ones among your people, they would lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they would fall. And
Mm-hmm.
then a few verses later, he says in verse 27, as for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil. They will speak lies to each other at the same table, but it will not succeed, for the end is still to come at the appointed time. And then he says again, let's see, in verse 35, that some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. So you think about that Isaiah 66 passage. Um, Shall I bring to the point of birth and not give delivery? It's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
this is what Daniel 11's all about. You have these birth pangs, or these times of trial in Israel's history, where they thought the end was about to come, but no, it was still going to come at the appointed time. And then for some reason in the first century, when Jesus comes, now God's like, actually, no, that all that setup was just for nothing. This is
Right.
still postponed 2,000 years. That doesn't make any sense. If
No.
if they were wrong in trying to bring in the kingdom before the time, then we are equally wrong through our theology attempting to postpone the kingdom after the time when it was fulfilled. If so, I think your
Very.
point about the omniscience of God and Him being able to see the end from the beginning is spot on. We have to honor the His timeline, not our own timeline, out of our own, wanting to hold our own theology together or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think you made some really, really good points there. That passage back there in Daniel 11, what is it, verse 23, 28, somewhere along in there, of the violent men who would strive through their own efforts
Yeah,
to bring the kingdom in, to
yeah,
bring in the time of the end. And the Lord says, guys, you're wasting your time. It's not time yet.
yep, that's right. That's right.
So which verse is that? 23?
There's one in 14, and then about the violent ones, and then there's one at verse 27, and then
Yeah.
there's another one at verse 35. So,
Yeah, the first one about the violent men seeking to bring in is the one that I had in mind. When I stumbled on that years ago, I was like, "Whoa, yeah," and see that corresponds over there in Matthew chapter 16. Um, Here, the law and the prophets were until John, but John began to preach the kingdom, and violent men seek to take it by force.
hmm. Oh yeah,
Same
yeah,
same kind of concept, but it has to do with, back there in Daniel chapter 11, those were violent men seeking to bring the kingdom in through violence.
hmm.
That's the same identical situation as in the first century. A man, no, pardon me,
Oh,
man
bless you.
trying to bring in the kingdom through force.
There's another text as well. Oh, it slipped my mind, but Jesus tells the scribes that uh, they've not only rejected the gospel of the kingdom, but now they've shut it up and locked it up and pretty much thrown away the key so that nobody else can enter it either. That's what they were trying to do. Which passage is that? Do you recall? You know
Do
the
what
one
now?
where Jesus tells the scribes that
Yeah.
they've attempted to lock up the kingdom
Oh
uh,
my goodness.
or shut up the kingdom. There we go. Yeah, Matthew 23. Is that it? Matthew 23:13.
That sounds familiar, but I'm drawing a blank right now. Boy, I
You
hate to do that.
Yeah, there we go. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven from people. For you do not enter it yourselves, nor do you allow those
Yes.
who are entering to go in. So, what's interesting is what Jesus condemned the Pharisees for is the very thing that dispensationalists have attempted to do to their theology, saying that nobody was allowed to go into the kingdom in the first century because they rejected it, and we can't have access to the kingdom till the rapture. So this
Until
yeah, to the millennial reign. So this whole idea of the kingdom postponement is actually fulfilling the vision of the Pharisees and the scribes, not the vision of Jesus and of God. So
yeah, yeah, good points. Pardon me. So that point that Yahweh was saying all the way back here in Isaiah 66. And of course, we have to keep in mind, and this gets back to the very point that I was making. Yahweh could anticipate in his sovereignty, in his omniscience. God knew exactly what was going to happen when his son came. He knew. Psalms chapter 2. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. He shall hold them in derision. Why? Well, because why do the heathen rage? Why do the heathens imagine vain things? Why do the kings of the earth set themselves array against the Lord and against his anointed? And then it says, he who sits in the heavens shall laugh. He will hold them in derision. And there's one little bitty word there that holds a world of meaning. Yet have I set my king on my holy hill Zion. That word yet. He is basically saying to the rebellious, to the disobedient, to those who are going to reject the kingdom, do your worst, guys. Do whatever you want to. Kind of like Daniel 11. It doesn't matter. I'm going to laugh at your efforts. Now, why would God postpone the kingdom, the Messianic temple,
Right.
if he was, after all, saying, I know what they're going to do. They're going to reject my son. They're going to hate him. They're going to despise him. But I'm going to laugh at him. And I'm going to enthrone him anyway. Oh, but I'll just do it 2,000 years later because they messed my plans up.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me. And of course, you and I were raised in a strong anti-dispensationalist background, so we've been hearing these arguments since we were kids. But for someone who's tuning in who might be from a dispensationalist background, this might be the first time they've ever even heard of some of these passages, at least in the light that we're trying to show them. And so one of the things that is interesting to me is that Acts chapter 2 plainly says, through Peter, that Jesus was delivered over according to the foreknowledge of God. This was not something outside of his plan. In fact, this is another thing the dispensationalists do through their teaching, is they kind of side with the apostles who told Jesus over and over again, you're not going to die. We're not going to let you die. That's not part of the plan. And yet when Jesus went to the garden and he contemplated the fact that he could call legions of angels and that he could rule on the throne that's what he decided. He had all power at his disposal, and yet he decides to not do his will, but to do God's will, which was apparently for him to die on the cross, which of course leads to resurrection and him becoming the cornerstone in the Messianic temple. And what's important for this, and if you're listening to this and you're amillennial or post-millennial and you're cheering us on as we get to dispensationalists, what you have to consider is that if you agree that Jesus is the cornerstone of the Messianic temple and that we as Christians make up the Messianic temple as spiritual stones and we are abiding in that temple today, then you have to understand the correlation between the establishment of the Messianic temple and the return of the people to the land, the fulfillment of the promises made to the fathers, which is the definition of resurrection in the Old Testament. Ezekiel 37 and Hosea 13 and Isaiah 25, all of those resurrection passages are rooted in a context of returning from exile and being a part of this new covenant and living in this Messianic temple. So if you admit that the Messianic temple is here, yes, that's huge against dispensationalism, but it's also against other traditional eschatologies, which postpone the resurrection beyond the timeline that Jesus and that God gave and the prophets gave. So that's another important point too, is that it's all tied up together.
It is an extremely important point. I never will forget, I was actually in my very first formal written debate. And I was talking about my opponent, who was a dispensationalist. And I was talking about the postponement doctrine. And I said, now, I want to address my Church of Christ amillennial brethren. Well, I wasn't supposed to do that.
Yeah.
But I said, guess what? We have a postponement aspect to our theology as well. I didn't make the point in exactly and precisely the way that you did, but I made the point that if the Messianic temple and if the kingdom has been established, then the Lord has come, the judgment has come, resurrection has come. And I'll never forget the look on one of the men in the audience who was an elder of a downtown congregation, very, very conservative group. I thought he was going to jump up out of his pew and come choke me down.
Oh, this wasn't a written debate. This was you said written debate at first.
I'm sorry. No. This
Okay,
is my very first formal debate, public debate in 1983. He was not happy with me at all. Word got back to me, and he was a friend. Okay, I knew him, still know him up until his recent death, but I was told that, boy, he was absolutely over the top angry with me and said something to the extent I was there to condemn the Baptists. I was not there to call attention to problems within the churches of Christ. So
Oh, that's funny.
yeah,
Oh,
uh, but every futurist eschatology has a postponement element to it. They just don't think about it because they dichotomize, as you were pointing out so very well there. They say, "Oh yeah, we're the messianic temple today. We God dwells in us, and we in Him." And postmillennialists are fond of saying, Kenneth Gentry certainly does it. Revelation 21, 22. That's the glorified church that came into existence into full bloom in AD 70. That is not at all the end of time existence in heaven. He said that in his little small book on Revelation, navigating the book of Revelation. And when I read that, I was literally stunned
hmm.
because here's Kenneth Gentry, postmillennialist, condemns preterists over and over and over again. Just recently wrote another article. Preterism is full of holes, full of error. Uh, so, like I said, here's this guy claims that we've got to follow the creeds, we got to be true to church history. And yet, Kenneth Gentry says, commenting on Revelation chapter 21, verses 1 to 3, contrary to the traditional view of eschatology, this is not about the end of time existence on a glorified earth or in heaven. This is the church being glorified after the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And you're just going, wow. Okay, thank you. You're a full preterist now.
Yeah. I, that was a position that I held for a long time, thanks to Foy Wallace and related works and teachers. And so when I forced myself to be consistent is when I became a preterist, because
Yes.
you're looking at Revelation 21, no more tears, no more crying, no more death, no more suffering. And if you're able to say that that is in reference to the glorified church after AD 70, then it's only a small step. It feels like a big step, but it's only a small step to say, wait a minute, if that's the case, then isn't 1 Corinthians 15, death being swallowed up for all time, isn't that the same idea? Isn't 1 Thessalonians 4, living in the presence of God forever? Isn't that what Revelation 21 is about? And so if you see the force of the at hand and the shortly to come to pass statements in Revelation 1 and 22 and make that kind of argument about Revelation, then 1 Thessalonians 4 and 1 Corinthians 15 are fairly easy passages to fit within that paradigm once you establish God's timeline, not what we expect, but what God has laid out. And that's really what this is about. I mentioned this on the program before, Don, but I was talking to somebody, several people, as you have, about prophecy, and they want to talk about the nature of the prophecy. And the thing that I tried to explain to them was I didn't get to my position by first studying the nature of the prophecy. I wasn't reading 1 Corinthians 15 one day or 1 Thessalonians 4 and said, this seems to be talking about a corporate body, a transformation, the covenants or something like that. I started by looking at the time statements. And so when you consider God's timeline, that forces you to go, well, I believe the Bible to be true, and I believe that the Bible is inspired. And so either God did what he said he was going to do, or the Bible is simply not from God. And since I accepted the first proposition there that God is going to do what he said he's going to do, it forced me to go, well, then he must not have done it in the way that I expected him to, which is okay because Jesus and God have done things throughout history in ways that we haven't expected them to. So why not also in the realm of eschatology as well? So that's yeah.
Well, and I think that's a common path that so many people have taken, and there's a tremendous amount of similarity in with the path that I took as well. Uh, I began to encounter these countless time statements, and it was like, well, wait a minute. And I tried my best to coordinate and to correlate and to assimilate time statements with my traditional idea of the nature. And one of the things, I'll never forget this. Uh, I was struggling. I was really, really struggling. I was studying one morning, had been studying for a good little while. And at the time, I had just strictly my good old King James. That's all I had on my desk at the time. And I'm finding all this. The coming of the Lord is at hand. Now, in a very, very little while, the one who is coming will come and will not delay. Behold, the judge stands before the door. Behold, I come quickly. And boy, I was just like, holy cow, wow. Okay, I can see
Mm.
how all of that relates to Jesus in Matthew 24:34. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. Um, I had already begun to see the nature of apocalyptic language, but it hadn't fully settled down on me yet, and with the full load, as it were. Pardon me. So here I was struggling, literally trying to find a way out of these time statements. So I go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Paul said, now we beseech you, brethren, by the parousia, the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, and our gathering together to him, that you be not soon shaken in mind or troubled by a spirit or by an epistle, as if it was from us, that the day of the Lord is at hand. And I'm going, problem solved.
Yeah.
I've got all of these verses talking about the day of the Lord being at hand, coming quickly, coming shortly. That fits Matthew 24 perfectly. But now here, Paul is talking about something else. And he's talking about 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. And he says, don't let anybody convince you that it is at hand. Boy, I just felt such a flood of relief. And then I made a mistake. I had a lot of different translations on a shelf behind me.
Right.
And I had my Greek text that I had not opened. So I opened up my Greek text first, just to confirm that what I was reading in my good old King James was accurate. And the Greek of the text is, do not let anyone convince you that the day of the Lord has already come. And I was like, wait a minute. Say what? What?
Yep.
I mean, that literally, I can remember just leaning back in my office chair, Daniel, literally stunned. The logic of the text was overwhelming. If the day of the Lord is what I always thought it was, if the parousia is what I was taught that it was, how could anybody convince anyone that the earth burning, time ending event of the resurrection of every physical body that ever happened, ever died, had already happened? So that naturally segued to 2 Timothy chapter 2:18. Good old Hymenaeus and Philetus, they say the resurrection has already passed. They overthrow the faith of some. So, okay, Preston, how could anybody convince anybody that the resurrection, as taught by me, as taught by my dad and his dad, and every preacher that I know,
Yeah.
how could anybody convince anybody it already happened?
Yeah. Even Peter used that argument, didn't he? We know that David's sepulcher is with us to this day. There it
It's right
is.
out
You know.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pardon me. There it is.
And so when I did the same thing in that passage, Don, it's not at hand, and I thought, oh, thank goodness. But the problem was, is I thought the man of sin was talking about the Jewish persecutors because of
Yeah,
Franklin
yeah.
Camp. So it wasn't really all that great. It was a temporary moment of relief until I read down in the passage and realized where I was. But
Yeah.
that yeah, because I had a King James version was my primary Bible, but at that point I'd already picked up on Ione and the need to look at. I think I purchased an English Standard Version because I knew that it had age, and so I would get out my little English Standard Version and flip through it and make sure it said age before I went on. But
Yeah.
uh, that yeah, that I had the same experience you did in that passage. Um,
Well, my trouble was, but it was but it was still a relief. I was raised believing that the man of sin was the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope. So,
Ah,
okay, sure, nobody could convince anybody that already taken place because after all, the Pope hadn't even come around yet. Roman Catholic Church hadn't been established yet. So, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. See, I'm good
yeah,
until I
yeah.
looked at the Greek, and of course, that was long before I discovered a computer. And so I couldn't go to Bible Gateway. Certainly didn't know what Bible Logos
It,
was.
I didn't do that either, and I have no idea why. To this day, I have no idea why. I mean, at that point, I was already building computers and had used technology and had my phone and everything and used Google for everything. But I have no idea. I never used Google to try to figure out preterism when I was getting started
Wow.
back in 2015. It wasn't until after I got into it good that I started looking up online. And I think what that was is I was so trained to only use Church of Christ material
Oh, yes.
unless it was specifically uh, specifically suggested to you by somebody else, and so that was trusted. And so I was probably just too afraid to even get on there and look, that I might come across some denominational teaching that would lead me astray. So I just stuck with my Bible until until I pretty much was until I became a preterist, and then I allowed myself to get on and start looking at more of your information and some others as well. But
Well,
it was
when I was in preacher school, Harrison, Arkansas, they they never strongly verbalized the caution and the warning about studying material that was produced by non-Church of Christ people.
yeah.
But they would say, you got to beware of the liberal scholarship out there, folks. Just be careful what you read. Be cautious about who you trust, and that's along the lines of what you're saying. But I remember so well discovering some of this world class scholarship. One of the very first authors that I discovered was F.W. Farrar, a 19th century Episcopalian scholar that is still to this day one of my favorite writers. Uh, he was not a full preterist, but he was like that close.
Hmm.
And I read him avidly with his the early church, the history of the early church, produced in 1887. I read that thing just over and over. I don't remember enough of it today. I wish I remembered as much of it as I once did. But it was a really really excellent book. He makes a comment in the book, to paraphrase it roughly. The early dating in the book of Revelation is so well established among scholars that no serious scholar would even dare question it.
Huh.
That was in 1887.
Huh.
And so when I discovered some genuine world class scholars who were bringing all of this linguistic, historical data to the forefront to help me understand the biblical text, to help me understand the context, the historical context, and even in many instances, the Old Testament context of the New Testament. I was literally blown away. I couldn't get enough. I could not buy enough books, and I'm still that way today.
Yeah, I think I have his book, The Life of Christ.
Yes,
I
big
think,
book, great big,
yeah, it's a
great big
big
book.
book. Yeah, I think that was one of the books that Franklin Camp suggested to get in his class on Romans, and so that was part of the advantage that I had, Don, over you and your studies, is that
Mm-hmm.
in Second Thessalonians 2, it was I was taught that the man of sin was maybe the Jewish persecutors or the Jewish
Yeah,
priesthood or something like that. So,
that was totally foreign to the world in which I was raised.
or
I mean,
maybe even Nero, maybe. So,
ah,
yeah.
yeah, okay. So all of this, ladies and gentlemen, has to do with this concept of the messianic temple, and we've been focused especially on the concept of this postponed kingdom. Well, if it was a postponed kingdom, then it was a postponed temple. But what does Yahweh say in Isaiah 66? Shall I bring to the time of the birth and not bring forth? And by the way, we need to develop this ever so briefly. We don't have all that terribly much time left. But there is a doctrine here that is being alluded to this time of birth, and the scholars call it the birth pangs of Messiah. This doctrine is found in Micah. It is found in Hosea. It is found in Isaiah. It's found in Zechariah. This doctrine is this. And first of all, let me give you a real brief rundown of the Jewish eschatological timeline, their narrative of eschatology. They believe that in the last days, there would be a time of great tribulation. The Great Tribulation was not a new doctrine introduced by Jesus. The Jews believed in the Great Tribulation. Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse 5. In the context of the coming new creation, in the context of the coming new covenant world, in the context of the coming of the Messiah, who would sit on the throne of David and rule forever and forever, the Lord said, at that time, it shall be the time of Jacob's trouble, a time like none other. So here in Jeremiah, we have the concept of this great tribulation. Well, the great tribulation would be accompanied by, in the last days, and I should have said, Elijah would come first. Elijah would come heralding the great and the terrible day of the Lord. Then would follow the great tribulation by the representative of Belial, Satan. And he would be the evil one. There was a lot of ambiguity in the in the Hebraic sources about that, but nonetheless, there was that concept of the arrival. And they had a doctrine of Leviathan, the devil as the great serpent, who would be active in the last days. They called this great tribulation the birth pangs of Messiah. Emil Schurer, in his, at one time it's 4-volume set, been reduced to 2 volumes now, The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah. And I highly recommend it if you're into good reading. Every paragraph is full of stuff. I kid you not. He packs a world of history. And like I said, the 2-volume set is now available instead of having it in 4. In the 4-volume set, you actually got an extended index, which is very, very helpful. But nonetheless, Emil Schurer says, pardon me, throughout the history of Israel's thought, there was the concept that in the last days, that before the coming of Messiah, before the coming of the kingdom, before the resurrection, there will be a time of unparalleled tribulation upon Israel. Now that's rather remarkable that the rabbis understood the great tribulation was coming on Israel. And you have to ask the question, why did the rabbis believe that the great tribulation was coming on Israel? Because you see, that would have to be viewed, the great tribulation coming on Israel would have to be viewed as a covenantal judgment from Yahweh. That's astounding. That's incredibly important. And the reason I say it's incredibly important is because modern day dispensationalists say that the great tribulation that is coming is not a covenantal judgment on Israel. It's simply a Gentile attack of Israel. Wait a minute. That's not how the rabbis understood it. They understood it as a covenantal judgment of Israel for violating Torah. That's why Elijah would be there to call Israel back to Israel and to say, obey the law of Moses, my servant. Malachi chapter 4, verse 4. Israel would be disobedient. Elijah would call them back to disobedience, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. Malachi chapter 4, verse 5 and 6. And so the rabbis and the ancient Jews believed, and this was unlike a lot of other doctrines that were so disparate and all over the map and who knew what they believed. This was a really, really common thread in all of ancient Israel's eschatological narrative. At the climax of this great tribulation, Messiah would come and deliver them. and the resurrection would take place, and the kingdom would be established, and eternity would ensue, although they had the concept of the millennium. So some, not the dominant view, but some rabbis believed in a 40-year millennium. I've got the citations if anybody wants that. It was not an unknown doctrine.
Which book is that in? Don't you have that in one of your books?
I've got that. Well, actually, I believe I cite that in Joseph Vincent's book on the millennium, past, present, or future, because I wrote a chapter in that book, and I believe I cite the rabbinic sources on that in there.
Good, good.
And I believe I also cite it in my book, The Resurrection of Daniel, chapter 12, future or fulfilled.
Yeah, okay, good. I've got that one.
Yeah. So this is the narrative. So here the Lord is saying, shall I bring to the time of birth? Am I going to make you go through the birth pangs of Messiah, the great tribulation, and not bring that birth of the kingdom and the resurrection and salvation, the promised land, not deliver you to that? The Lord said, no, I'm going to deliver. Now, we understand from chapter 65 that it will only be the remnant that would be saved. We know from Isaiah chapter 10, verse 22, quoted by Paul in Romans chapter 9, though the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, yet only a remnant shall be saved. And that was the Jewish concept of it as well. There's a book about this thick. Oh my goodness gracious, I just lost the author's name. It is entitled The Survivors in Israel. And it is one of the best documentations that God never, ever, ever promised to save, quote, all Israel. The only promise that God ever gave was the remnant. And that's critical. That's important in Isaiah 65. As one says of the new wine that is in the cluster, do not destroy it all, for there is a blessing in it. So I will not destroy all of them. And I will bring my seed into the valley of Achor, and I will bless them there. Isaiah 65, 8 and following. So this concept of the remnant is extremely important. It's important for understanding the Jewish narrative. It is important for understanding right here in Isaiah 66. Shall I bring to the time of labor? That's the birth pangs of Messiah. And let's not forget Jesus in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 8. There are going to be wars. There are going to be rumors of wars. There's going to be famine. There's going to be earthquakes. There's going to be pestilence. There's going to be famine. These are the beginning of birth pains. Jesus knew, as a good, faithful Jew, Jesus knew the doctrine of the messianic birth pangs and what Israel had to go through in order for the kingdom to come. And so Paul in Romans chapter 8 would say, I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is about to be revealed. Here's Paul writing in the 50s. During a period of intense persecution, or of turmoil, I should say, not as much persecution as was about to come, but nonetheless, a time of incredible turmoil. There really was famine, earthquake, peril. It was everywhere in the Roman Empire. I had started to write a full commentary on the Olivet Discourse at one time, and I chronicled no less than 45 major military actions and civil wars in just the first century, from the time Jesus spoke until 70 AD. Wow. 45 of them. It was incredible. Well, look, folks, we are out of time. I want to thank you for joining us here on Two Guys in a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. Daniel, great to have you back and great to be back. I'm glad that we got it recorded this evening.
And it's live. They're already listening to it now.
Yeah, so. There you go. All right. Thanks again. Good night. God bless.